All right, welcome to our chat with Carey Linde, our esteemed friend from Vancouver, a family lawyer. I'm going to let him introduce himself and describe some of his background, but first I'm just going to share my screen. Just want to tell you a little bit about the group that's hosting tonight. That's us here at Parental Alienation Canada. So that's our Facebook group here, and it's just we're pretty new, but we're growing really quickly. We have some good rules and good. We have a team of admins that kind of keep the common sense rules and the framework that we've set up here. So I think that's what sets us apart is we have good rules like no spam and no advertising, and we don't have photos of children and things like that to really look out for the well-being of our people here. And we tend to focus on support and services, some advocacy, but mostly it's a service that we're providing here at PAC, Parental Alienation Canada. Good information, correct information. There's aggressive misinformation campaign. So we're like non-commercial, just a support group of information and support. Okay, and you can join us here at Parental Alienation Canada. I hope you will. If you don't, you can still attend our events. They're always open to the public, and everybody is welcome to join our events because one of our intent is to spread good information. So I will get started with Mr. Linde. So Carey, your background speaks for itself, but what is your background in parental alienation? Can you elaborate on that? Why do you have an interest in parental alienation?
Well, I was a litigator, a lawyer in court on personal injury and a whole bunch of things, and then I decided I wanted out of law, and this was maybe 20 years ago. I took off for a year or two and realized I couldn't make it, but in the interim, discovered a lot of things about fathers and problems that fathers were having. So I came back in the 90s with the moniker of Divorce for Men, which was sort of humorous at the time. And then, of course, parental alienation started to be something which Richard Gardner, the child psychiatrist out of Columbia University in New York, started to write about. It was a phenomenon that was appearing more frequently in the United States because of their vastly increased population and because doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, and lawyers could specialize a bit more on behalf of men or dads, whereas in Canada, because of the low population comparatively, you won't find any psychologists in Canada who can afford to claim to have a bias in favor of fathers, not necessarily a bias, but an interest or a specialty. And you can't find, to this day, you won't find psychologists who do the Section 211 reports, which used to be the Section 215 reports, claiming to have a special interest in alienation, in parental alienation, with some exception, certainly not in the West Coast. So Gardner, I happened to have a client who had the money, a long time ago, to get Richard Gardner involved, which forced me to dig deeply into what that was all about. And then I had a follow-up where I had him on another case. And I was fortunate enough when I went back east to meet him a few times at his home and get to know him. Unfortunately, he had a terminal illness, a nerve illness that was going to kill him. So he committed suicide, as some of you may know. And that was the stop there. In the meantime, the feminists the victim feminists in the United States mounted a very vicious campaign against him and anybody else, and essentially accused him and parental alienation of being a mechanism to hide abuse by fathers against kids by simply blaming it all on the mother, which was hogwash. And so that's where that started. And he was very outspoken in his advice and his thoughts, which I to this day think that he was bang on. He had many people have come along and sort of poo-pooed him or tried to redefine everything, but no matter who sets up an alternate system of analysis, they still come down and label out each of the criteria which he named as being indicative of an alienating parent. And so over the years, I've just had some. I don't have any at the moment. It's unfortunate that a lot of parents think that the other side is alienating when they're not. I find a lot for, because most of my clients are men, not all, but and a lot of them, all the mother is alienating the kids. But when you look right down at it, no, there's no luckily there's no alienation going on. It's just something else.
Okay, Carey, I think that's a segue actually to my next question, what you're saying right now. Have you heard of the M.E.N study, which claims that abusive parents use PA as a defense? And this was later debunked by the M.E.N study. Can you comment on this misinformation campaign to delegitimize PA? So the M.E.N study and this, yeah, you talked about the feminists, but radical feminists, I usually say, but the M.E.N study. So can you comment on that and this misinformation campaign?
I have to apologize. The name rings a bell. I'm sure I looked at it at one point. I'm not up to speed on precisely what it was, but it is the case that not just PA, but some of the better programs that some people have set up in North America to help what I call decultify these kids have been run off too by false allegation of sex abuse. I mean, there are some pretty nasty people out there whose agenda is to destroy anybody who tries to put a reasonable perspective on this. So
Carey, I could send you the link, or I can send you the documentation that proves that the M.E.N study is completely fraudulent and that she doesn't even do basic peer review, and none of her results can be replicated. So it's complete nonsense. And it was later debunked by the M.E.N study. But the damage has been done with that, and that actually leads me to my next question. Leaf petitioned the UN for years, and based on the M.E.N study, and have had PA removed from the index, and they succeeded. And I think like, even if I Google the like estrangement, which is like legitimate, like actual abuse, the child rejecting it, they say that they kind of segue, or there's so much misinformation. Like if you just Google it, they say that PA is like, that's the first thing I get, is that PA is just a defense for abusive parents. So the damage has been done, even though it's not scientific, or there's no solid science research that actually supports
Yes, but I mean, and of course, a lot of people were hoping it would be in the DSM-5, and while it wasn't precisely, there are aspects of the DSM-5 which deal with that. They relabel everything. However, let me tell you this, that the bench, the judges, and the psychologists who get involved are all very familiar now with the dynamic. And it doesn't really matter, I find, what you call it, because ultimately what you need to do to prove it is to get evidence before a judge which is believable as to the behavior, as to what's happening. I mean, if you walk in, and I'm sure all of the people on here, this is not news, but if you just walk in and say the other parent is an alienator, you don't just sit down and say that's that. You have to go through a rather elaborate job, certainly in pretrial and in examinations for discovery, or what the Americans call depositions, you need to get an awful lot of good stuff. And then I always recommend Amy Baker, if anybody is familiar with her. She's recently retired. She's kind of the psychologist in the States who's written, well, I was going to say the most, but certainly a lot. And she has an excellent template of that you can put in front of someone to check off and do all these things. And if you can prove all those points in court, then bingo, you've got an alienator. Now, she used to charge for her services, but she's backed out of that. And I don't know if you can still, but Amy Baker is her name. I don't know what she's doing. And of course, there are a lot of others, and some of them are extraordinarily expensive, unbelievably expensive. And it's an expensive operation. But the point I'm making.
Template, does she charge for the template, or can people just get that online, or do you have to?
No, she would charge for it. She would charge a couple $1,000 US, or $3, I think, at some point. But back then, if she was challenged as an expert, she would have to come to court. I mean, if you serve all that information on the opposing counsel and you want to introduce her stuff into court, then the other side, of course, has the right to demand of you that you produce her as a witness for cross-examination. So she backed out of that, but somehow those things are still there. So it's been a while. That's why I say I'm not sure where she's at. A couple of years ago, I think I got permission to show one of those to a client. And even though I couldn't use it as an expert report or in any kind of evidence, it was a phenomenally good template for somebody who was experiencing that to pick up on, dozens and dozens and dozens of things that they wouldn't have thought of putting down, but which all go in their own way to supporting certain one aspect or another of the various level of the alienation.
Okay, another question I have is the Bar Association's opposition to shared and default parenting. And I don't know if we should talk about shared parenting first or what that is, but equal shared parenting, there is a lobby group trying to get equal shared parenting in Canada, the Canadian Equal Parenting Council in Canada, and I, Glenn Sheraton, a few months back. And so his thesis was that, or his assertion was that if we have equal shared parenting, this will greatly mitigate a lot of the drama and harm that the high conflict divorce is causing, and greatly mitigate parental alienation as well. Then, but there's also, so that's that. But the Bar Association opposes equal shared parenting, and the things that they've said seem nonsensical to me. But can you comment on the Bar Association? They're a powerful lobby group.
The Canadian Bar Association, which has subsections or provincial sections, and in each province they break down into subsections. There'll be the criminal subsection, the family subsection, the personal injury subsection, all of those. And remarkably enough, the Canadian Bar, again, it's the radical feminist, the gender feminist, whatever you want to call them, that has been against this. However, I just heard in the last month or two that the British Columbia branch is now thinking of supporting it, which is amazing, because because they're better late than never, because most psychologists now support it, and most judges support it in British Columbia. Now, I don't know about anywhere else, because it's not uncommon. Well, as a matter of fact, it's getting to be more and more common. It's not a default position, but it's common to go into court and in front of chambers or something and say it's that I'm here, my client would like to have eventually move from whatever they are now to equal time shared parenting within a year, and to see a judge just turn on a dime and look at opposing counsel and say, well, what's wrong with that, counsel? I mean, and it infuriates people who think that it's not a default, but it's a constant thing that they're now aware of is better for kids. So that fight has been successful. But the problem is it's not a default. It's not automatic like property division and those various things.
Mm. So my next question is related to that. The Canadian Equal Parenting Council put through 2 bills for shared parenting, equal shared parenting, and both of them failed. And I saw that the Canadian Bar Association, like they were pretty vigorous about their opposition, and I would say that they have a conflict of interest because of the billions of dollars that high conflict divorce makes. So I would say that they have a
Yeah, I mean,
conflict of interest.
yeah, the political side will never be won by, I mean, you got the politicians who are behind and not catching up. You've got psychologists who now finally are coming around, realizing they're not going to lose their clientele. They're not going to lose their customers if they support shared parenting. It used to be the case. And you've got the courts now. I mean, a young judge would be someone in their 50s or their 40s, and has been around and they're hip to it. The problem lies still in the old-fashioned biases of women being believed more than men. And if you've got a mother who's out there claiming, I mean, the lawyers and the personality disordered women who I'm up against all the time are clever enough to know what the statutes say and what they have to prove or at least allege. For instance, now the new Family Law Act in British Columbia from 6 years ago adds, you know, if there's been violence, if the children have witnessed any violence, not been the subject of violence, of course, that too, but witnessed violence, that goes against the parent who was the violent one. So they always allege these now. It's very rare to find somebody who's adamantly trying to keep the kids away from a father to not allege violence. Years ago, when the legal aid system was first sort of cut back, I'm talking 10 or 15 years ago, the new requirement was that if a mother wanted to get legal aid, there had to be an allegation of violence. Well, it went off the chart. You know, every single application, if anybody wanted legal aid, had to allege violence. You still have that in there, and you've got judges who just buy that nonsense. So there's still serious problems in there, but they're evidentiary.
Okay, related to that, like there are many judges and lawyers and psychologists and these professionals that don't think that PA is legitimate. And I've talked to lawyers, like family lawyers, that don't think PA is legitimate, and they think that, you know, that it's a stupid idea because some people, I don't know what they think, but they think that PA is just a defense for abuse or whatever. So they don't want default equal shared parenting. I don't know if that's the real reason or if they have other agenda or whatever, but I've talked to lawyers like that. So how can we get mainstream understanding of the correct information to everybody, as many people as possible,
I mean,
professionals?
I don't know how others do it. The only way I can see doing it is every time that a solid case of clear alienation is presented in a trial, that judge sees it and knows it and can't deny that it's there. What they want to call it is another thing. I mean, you know, there's a clique of psychologists who are setting themselves up as the experts, and they don't want to use words which are blaming. They don't want to use derogatory language. They don't want anybody to be held at fault. And you can't simply say that one parent is responsible. Well, there's all kinds of things. They try to, you know, it makes me sick. And they cost a fortune, and they don't do a particularly good job. They should be banished. It used to be that you could take a child to one psychologist, of whom there wouldn't be as many as you wished, who were good at it, who would help a child establish a safe space, learn to be able to have some confidence in themselves, to get up enough guts to sort of address an alienating parent or a bad parent as to what they would like. And they're still there, but they get reported and sued so often that what's happening is that you get these people who set up with You get a counselor for the father and a counselor for the mother, one for the child. You got the head counselor. You get mediate. I mean, it costs like $80,000 over 2 years with no guarantees. And if they don't, and they never will call a spade a spade. They'll never say it's somebody's fault. They don't believe in that. They think that's counterproductive and is injurious. It's kind of like they're woke. It's sort of, it's maddening. And I'm waiting for somebody who's got the money to let me sue these organizations, because they've got judges and psychologists convinced that this is the way to go if you have the money.
Yeah, I've run into some psychologists that don't think that this is like a abuse from a unilateral abuse from one parent, and it is maddening because this parent is got an abusive personality disorder, and they're manipulating the child, and it's clear abuse, and psychologist just refuses to acknowledge that, and
they don't understand.
Frustrating.
These judges do not understand, the new ones do not understand that a person in front of them who looks absolutely normal can be very mentally ill. And they do not understand the pressure on a child to support one parent against the other and seem convincing through a list of falsehoods. They don't seem to understand that that's what's happening. And, if I say that's happening, they'll say, well, where's your evidence for that? Well, it's human nature,
So that's what I was wondering is like, there's a lot of judges and these professionals that don't see it. And that's what I'm just wondering, that seems like a huge mountain we have to educate all these professionals. And it is common sense, all of us working class people, we're at the whim of this system that is controlled by, it seems, shrill minority groups that have their own agenda. And
but you see, the problem is you don't have access to educate judges. Now, the judges do have people come in and talk to them, pretty high flying, some.
Well, there's radical feminist groups that educate judges. I've seen that. So why is it that these shrill minority groups that have very radical ideas are able to tell, preach wokeness to the judges, but normal common sense things like child abuse is not, manipulating children, that's not, you can't educate a judge about that.
But your politicians can do it. Now, for a while, the politicians in British Columbia, 10 or 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when they first started this, they really felt that there was some army of feminists out there who would defeat them in the next election, which is nonsense. And now I think politicians are realizing that, and they're more prepared to talk about things. So I'm optimistic in the long term, but in the meanwhile, a lot of people are losing their kids. I appreciate that. And
the damage to the children is lifelong, and it's lasting, and it's happening to them as their children when they're developing. So
I know, and I don't think anybody watching here, any of us, are not very much aware of that. So tactically, what do you do?
Yeah,
it's a never-ending fight. You talk to your member of parliament federally, but family law, the Divorce Act. I mean, I have been for many, many decades a very good friend of Ann Cools, who now she's retired from the Senate, but she did more for fathers in this country than any single human being over the years. And yet the provinces, the Family Law Act in British Columbia, as it's drafted, permits more good stuff to happen than any other province, and in particularly Ontario or the feds. So it's there. It's just a question of, okay, what do you do with it? How skillful are you in what you do with it? And the other thing is that it's the only progress that gets made is that a certain minor number of fathers who go to court eventually win and make a point. But they only do that because so many lose. And every time a father goes to court and loses, you got to realize that that's not a loss. That's putting everything up front one more time, because sooner or later, these things work. And funnily enough, if you look back at the cases in court which have advanced shared parenting, the vast majority have been mothers succeeding against fathers who were control freaks. In other words, the women are moving this thing along piece by piece by piece in some cases, not all of them by any means. And some dads are doing really well against mothers who are, disordered. However, it's a mix of gender and politics. Gosh, I'm sure I'm sounding depressing to everybody out there.
No, we need to have a realistic discussion about this. That's why we're talking about it.
Yeah.
Trying to educate as many people as possible about how to move us forward, and so we can get a shared goal of equal shared parenting in Canada. And that's what's going to help our families and our children.
There's no shortage of groups and organizations historically pushing on this. It's my perception, looking back over decades, that single issue women's things always work out much better than men. Men don't seem to have the stick-to-itiveness, or somehow women's organizations do well. Of course, they get the funding. They know how to, men's organizations get very little funding, although even that is slowly starting with CAFE, et cetera, and that's sort of breaking the mold.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the parental alienation group that we have on Facebook. It is, I suppose, the subtext is somewhat political because we're trying to spread good information, but it's gender neutral, and so we're trying to get everybody on board. And so we can get everyone, both men and women, or LGBT, anybody that's been, like, it doesn't matter. Parents are parents. Anyone can be alienated. And so maybe we need to all come together, like, and men and women and fathers and mothers and everybody, and work together and see it. Maybe that would be, how can we all get together on this? I mean, I would imagine instead of having all these, like being split, having all these little tiny groups, we should be moving together towards the goal, right? Because we have powerful opponents.
Yeah, well, I don't have an answer to that. I know that there's been a lot of groups for a lot of years on the subject between the Americans, and there's a lot of American groups, there's one American group with just women lawyers who are pushing.
Well, I'm not so concerned about the American groups because we're Canadian, so I want to focus on the Canadian. So the PAC group is focused on Canadian, but I don't know, we can support each other, but I'm trying to focus on Canada and our own laws, and I think we should deal with our own issue politically here.
No, I'm not suggesting otherwise. I just, I can't, as far back as I can remember, people have been trying to do this, and they come.
Have you noticed there's a lot of competition? Like they kind of have like I noticed sometimes like the parental alienation groups can be quite competitive, and I feel like that we have powerful opponents and we shouldn't be competing, or like it's not a competition.
Well, there's a dynamic which I first witnessed when I was doing personal injury, that people would be so totally wounded and injured from dealing with ICBC or the insurance corporation, wherever they were, that they would form groups. And I see the same thing in family law. I see the same thing in custody. I see the same thing in alienation, where you get somebody who has been so severely wounded that the group becomes their mechanism for recovery. They take it over. It's their story. Their ego wants to run it, and they're not acceptable to join some other group. You get this in that competition. I'm talking about it at its worst.
Yeah.
It's like
I've noticed the competitiveness, and I just feel like it's counterproductive to actually coming up with a solution for this.
Well, you just got to somebody's got to find some other group and say, okay, look, you can lead it, and you back out. I mean, if you get the egos, but yeah, I mean, I'm super impressed with what's happening with CAFE, because it's the first group that's actually reified. It's got things happening. It's got offices. It's doing things, and that's a big start.
Mhm.
And at the same time, the feminist organizations are being somewhat defunded. I mean, Leaf and other things are still out there. Um,
Mhm.
and now, of course, the whole world is splitting essentially into woke and unwoke. And I don't see that lessening. I think that that's going to be the ultimate signifier of which side of history you're on, and where the feminists and all that are going to be in the woke side and the rest on the unwoke side. And how that's going to impact family law is very interesting to think about.
Yeah, well, I've been at Cafe for about 6 years, and so that's my background is I worked in STEM as a professional communicator. I work in the science, technology, engineering, and math, which is dominated by men. So that's how I got into these issues, and I started volunteering at Canadian Association for Equality and their service center. But the reason why, like the Cafe doesn't have services for women, and there are plenty of mothers that are alienated. So I'd like to look at this issue more as a gender neutral issue. I feel like that would be, we need services for everybody. And it would be nice if we could depoliticize, what's going on as much as possible as far as the services are concerned. I mean, and I think I talked to Glenn about this, about the people that are doing the politics. They need to be stable. Like we can't, the people that are deeply wounded, they're the ones doing the services, and the people that are, talking to politicians, they can't be going off, talking to people that don't agree with what we're saying. We have to have people that are stable, that can actually do the politics. And so the services and the advocacy need to be separate. Would you agree with that? Or
Well, I mean, yeah, everybody should just do their thing. I mean, if Cafe is for men, then something equivalent. I mean, women have got all kinds of organizations. Women Against Alienation would be great, but I don't,
yeah, I think like I am not opposed to women's rights. I mean, I'm a woman, and so a lot of feminists would say that they are for women's rights, and and whether that's true or not, like whether the radical feminists or like these organizations, these Leafs are actually for women's rights, well, that's debatable. But so I think of these groups is Leaf as they're very radical in their ideas. So I consider them radical feminists, but like general women's rights. And I would say that parental, mothers have the same rights as fathers to access to their children. And so, and like, it's like domestic abuse is really a gender neutral, social issue. Like it's been falsely positioned as some sort of like women's issue. I'd say parental alienation is also like, it should include everybody in it. But like maybe just getting gender out of this would be a good way to look at it. Like you say, this isn't about women or men. This is about families and parents, and it affects everybody.
keep on trucking.
Yeah, you too. Well, we've got a few minutes. One question I want to ask you, any tips for parents in family court, like any concrete tips so that are alienated? You talked a little bit about the template. That was interesting, but that seems quite costly. And a lot of our parents that are alienated, like they've been financially destroyed by family court, which is very expensive, and they have to self-represent.
Well, the best tool, the only tool really, is counseling. And it's so hard to find a good counselor who knows what they're doing. And there's such pressure to put you into these programs, which are much more expensive. But if you have a child of any age who's being alienated, you have to get an order that the child get into counseling, and the order has to contain the proviso that the counselor and the child know that everything that is said is private, it's privileged, and unless there's an allegation of some physical abuse that has to be reported to the authorities, nothing is going to be said to anybody about what this child and that doctor, that counselor say, period. It's not for evaluation purposes. It's not for the purpose of producing a report. It's to give the child what I call a DMZ, a demilitarized zone, a space where they can say what they want, become friends with a new person, neither the mother nor the, and just get a sense of who they are. That is far and away the best tool, if you can do it.
Where can a parent get a counselor like that? Because some of them are not knowledgeable about PA. So like,
But there are some, and they're very busy. You know, you just have to look around.
okay, maybe you can give after this, you can give us some referrals if you can.
Well, in Vancouver, I know a couple. The trouble is, they're sort of retiring. I have to say, I have the last couple of years in each of my big alienating cases, the other side has successfully steered these off into these large, this REACH program of Susan Gamache or Alison Jones's program in North Vancouver, where they do these group, very expensive, and they need to go for a couple of years, and they do all these different things. And the courts think these are just hunky-dory because a judge named Peter Leask, who is a retired judge, is supporting it. And so they've got a high profile. And if someone's prepared to pay for it or push you hard enough, the judges seem to go for that. And as I say, I've had two of those. Both of them are total failures, absolute failures. Because in neither case were they prepared to label the mother, excuse my French, as the villain in the piece. Oh, we can't think like that, let alone talk like that.
I know a psychiatrist that was recently threatened to stop treating parents and counseling children for parental alienation from because of the radical feminist harassment and pressure.
Yeah.
So there are psychiatrists and counselors, I suppose, people that have certifications that can treat for parental alienation and can treat families, children. But the problem is the political pressure and on these people, and just like basically what I would call bullying. There's just political groups bullying these people.
And it used to be when I first started that psychiatrists used to do the evaluations, the section 215s, the section 15s, or what we now call the section 211 reports. But 15 or 20 years ago, the psychiatrists just pulled out. It's too much of a hassle, too many complaints. So now you've got psychologists. And we shouldn't underestimate the ability of a good psychologist to scope out an alienator. And they do it without mentioning the word alienation. I remember years ago, the case that I was involved with Richard, the gardener, the psychologist involved there stated after a whole bunch of stuff with just the kids that the mother was alienating. Well, the College of Psychologists in British Columbia went after her and wanted someone to sit in and supervise everything she did because she dared use that word. Luckily, she stuck to her guns and said F off, and they didn't do it.
What can we do? What can we do as just a community to support psychologists that support them so they're not standing by themselves when they get attacked like this? Is there anything we can do to help them?
I don't know. I mean, it used to be before the internet, they had journals. All these organizations would have newsletters, and you could put in an ad or you could write, but that's all gone.
We should find some way to support them so that because that would be something that we get to actually do to help this issue, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I do know that the people in Toronto, because of its bigger population, are doing, when I come up against something which I don't really know what to do, I get a hold of people in Toronto because they've done it. I mean, because the massive population difference between Toronto and Vancouver means that there's a lot more stuff happening in every aspect. And so if it hasn't happened here yet, it might have happened in Toronto. Bingo, you'll find something. So I urge you to, as you know, stay in touch with what they're doing.
Okay.
And I don't know about Montreal.
Yeah, well, it's good. Even if we don't have an answer, we can start thinking about the problem and thinking about the issue. But yeah, there's definitely, like I said, there's a psychiatrist I know that was recently bullied into not treating, and this person is not allowed to even acknowledge it, and has had their career threatened because they were treating people for PA. Okay, so I'm going to open up the Q&A session to our guests here that are live. Has anybody got any questions? If you can raise your hand or put a question in the chat.
Come on, don't be shy.
Don't be shy. Catherine, you want to go off mute and ask your question?
Yeah. Hi, Carey. Just to further on your counseling, when you get counseling involved in the established, divorced family execution, do you also recommend follow-ups on that to enforce it if that's not being followed by the other parenting party? Like, where's your guidance if you got that counseling in play but it's not being adhered to? Do you continually, repeatedly go back into court every time, or do you just?
Oh, no. There's two. Okay, so you start off, if both parties agree to it and consent to it, it's not going to be a horrible case, because mothers who are alienators hardly ever want to agree to it. So you get a court order, and the court order stays in place, and it stipulates things. And of course, if you've got a Supreme Court order, not a family court order, people can be in contempt. And yes, if the other parent doesn't take the child, or has the child talking about, I don't want to go, you're stuck having to go back into court. Those are limited tools. Yeah.
I just on a note, I do encourage the counseling part if parental alienation is part of your world. Taking care of yourself and ensuring that you've got counseling to best mentally go through this is key as well. Thank you, Carey, for your insight during the interview. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Hey, Carey, I have a question from David in the chat. He said, is it possible to get child therapists covered by community programs that have the necessary skills to identify and treat PA? The referrals I've received so far are over $225 an hour per child.
Well, I don't know of any funds which help, but certainly in British Columbia, you've got justice centers where they have social workers who purport to be able to help, and I'm sure some of them can. Some of them are very good. My experience is that you got to be careful. You don't want to get sort of the gynocentric ones, but that's the only place I know where you can get stuff for free is through the justice centers. You can get counseling, you can get Section 211s done. They take a long time, and they're not psychologists, so they cannot sort of diagnose and make certain statements which have the strength of a psychologist.
Okay. And also, if you're in the PAC group, the Parental Alienation Canada support group, like we have a group of people there that are all going through the same thing. And so if you ask for a referral, if you just make a post, people will give you suggestions, and so that's one way. And then, like I said, it's not an ad campaign. So you can get multiple options that way for your area. So that's one way, is just coming to the group and asking for a referral. Our next question is from Moody. Moody, would you like to come off mute?
Yeah, that would be useful, I guess, but you can hear me. So I guess my question is, with regards to going to court to try to get 50-50, like for me, I had 50-50 for 6 months, and then we had a dispute over New Year's Eve, and my ex pretty much said, okay, well, we can't agree on New Year's Eve, so you won't get the kids, and actually they don't want to go to you. And then she filed in court saying basically the kids want to stay with her, and she's programmed them to say that they want to be with her exclusively. And obviously now she's not saying I don't want to bring them to you, she's just saying the kids don't want to go see you, which is kind of the oldest, dirtiest trick in the book. And I think they're going along with it because she has a lot of power over them, and I'm sure they'll be hell to pay if they dissent from that view. So what can I be seeking in the court for her not to play the game that the kids don't want to see you?
How old are they?
10 and 13.
And what location are you? Which province?
Ontario, Ottawa.
Well, again, counseling. they need to get removed from the vice. The metaphor I like to use is that if you've got a shop bench vise, one piece is immovable, it's fixed to the bench. The other one comes in and out on a screw, and you're the fixed one. It's the mother who's got the screw, and it's up to her to move them off or bring them in, and the kids know that, so they're not going to do anything to make them tighten the screw. But if you can get them into counseling, that's really all there is. And otherwise, I don't know, unfortunately, if you legal aid, I don't know if that covers it. There are some good lawyers in that area. Were you in Toronto?
No, I'm in Ottawa, but my lawyer, I don't know what's up with COVID, but I feel like he's taken on more cases than he can give time to, and I feel like I've told him like every week, several times, like, when are you going to file the motion? When are you going to file the motion?
Well,
He filed an
okay.
emergency. Yeah, he filed an emergency motion, and she kind of lied and said, well, he FaceTimes and texts, which is not really true, because they don't really pick up my FaceTime, and I think they reply hi twice in 6 months. And so they did text me, but like 2 letters in 6 months.
Touch base with, I'll give it 2 names in Toronto. There's Brian Ludmer and what's his name? Oh my God, I'm thinking
Gene Coleman?
Gene Coleman. They may know somebody good in Ottawa.
There's also the Canadian Center for Men and Families in Ottawa, but they offer services, like we have a few of them. So that's Cafe Service Center for Men and Families, and their whole shtick is helping fellows like you, Moody. So you might think about, I can send you a link, or I'll send a link in the
Please.
chat. Yeah,
Like,
I
this-
would
this
definitely
will be
contact them. Yeah, and they
this will
have a
be reposted.
relationship. They have a relationship, like that's how I got Brian Ludmer on the call here a week ago, is by my relationship through Cafe. So I interact with those guys all the time, but that's like the hub for men in Ontario. So I would definitely contact them and see what programs
Sure.
you can get into. Yeah,
I appreciate it. Thank
no
you.
problem. So the next question we have is from Cindy. It's in the chat. She said, so this is for Carey. Carey, you mentioned someone having enough money to sue the organizations. Would you, let me see, would you do it if a bunch of alienated parents got together and paid you? So I don't know.
I'd love to, but you have to have a relationship. You can't just sue somebody because you think they're doing a bad job. You can sue if I had a client who'd gone and spent $70,000, and almost 2 years later, not a damn thing has changed. That person I could sue, but you can't just come along and say, "Oh, I see that problem over there. I'm not part of it. I want to sue." No. But if they wanted to raise the money for my client who can't afford to sue, and I'm not so sure. I mean, it's easy enough for me to say that, but he's kind of personally of the position. Well, if I've lost this, I've lost this, and if I sue, it's just going to be worse. And I may never have a relationship with my daughter anyway. Why try to make it worse? It gets complicated, but yeah. But who knows? Maybe the right one will come along someday.
It'd be nice if there was some consequences for $70,000 and the alienation is only worse, and there's no accountability, for these professionals.
Yeah.
So maybe some parents would be interested in helping somebody then specific if there's a really strong case with that person, and then just to make a statement, the other parents, like, even if it doesn't it's not a psychologist that affected them, but they may fund it just to make a statement, or
Well, the way you do that in this world is you raise enough money to have someone put together the history, write an article, and just spread it off as far around the internet as you possibly can. Be careful you're not defaming anybody. Get your facts straight.
Yes, but it is frustrating that this keeps happening, and none of these professionals seem to be held accountable. And I maybe some parents, my point was maybe some parents would be interested to fund, even if it doesn't direct, just because they're tired of not having consequences. That could be. Yeah. So a question from Anne is, where's Cafe Hub for Men? So I can answer that. I've been at Cafe, Canadian Association for Equality, for about 6 years, as I said. I also have a service center. It's a bicameral organization. with the cafe is more advocacy side. And I joined because I noticed that men's issues, father's issues was unfairly stigmatized. And Carey mentioned the power of women, women to kind of give a voice to some of these issues and legitimate make and kind of escalate and make issues more legitimate. People will listen. So they did deal with the whole panorama of men's issues, not just parental alienation, but they did co-produce the Erasing Family documentary, which is the documentary that Ginger Gentile did on parental alienation. It's excellent. You can watch it for free on Tubby with ads, and so I can post a link for that afterwards. And so yeah, Cafe does the advocacy, and if you look up Cafe online, like you'll see some smears, and so that's, like I said, that's the reason why I got involved, is I realized that that these men's issues are unfairly stigmatized. And I also support mothers, which is why the Parental Alienation Canada group is gender neutral, although I learned about these issues from fathers. Is there any other questions? We have a comment from Catherine. She says, "Thank you for taking time to fight for kids' rights and to love all caregivers." She says, "Thank you, Carey. Take care and all the best." Had to leave the meeting to do another call, but I just wanted to give you that comment that she says thank you and she appreciates you, Carey.
Well, you're welcome. I do. Let me just give a short little story, which is many years ago. I was at a conference, huge conference in Chicago on family matters, mainly white people, middle class, some African Americans, but 20 years ago, this was a middle class white phenomenon. And anyway, it broke up into many little groups, small groups. And there was one group called Fathers and Daughters. And so I went to that because I got two girls. And there was a fella there who probably was in his 50s or 60s. He gave the story that very recently, I don't know whether that would have been several months ago or a year earlier, he said he was home and there was a knock on the door, and he went to the door and there was a young woman standing there who looked at him. He had no idea who this woman was. And she said to him, "If it weren't for the birthday cards and the Christmas cards, I wouldn't be standing here." Well, it was his daughter he hadn't seen since she was 10, like 20 years earlier. And all he'd done for those years was simply send Christmas cards. That's all. And this child, as an adult, came back to him at that late stage. And I've heard those stories before. So unlike capital murder, where you get killed, you can't come back, in these cases, there always is the hope that things can turn around. They don't always, but if you give up, well, I'm sure none of you are giving up. Anyway, it's been a pleasure chatting with you, and I hope it's been useful.
We just have one more question, if that's okay.
I'm good for as long as you want to go.
Okay, we can go for another half hour. Does it make any difference to judges if a young sibling is alienated too? My daughter is 4, it says, and when her mom died in June, my other ex alienated both of us from my other 2 children the same week.
I think what the question means is there more evidence available to a judge to recognize what's happening if there's more than one child involved? Absolutely. Yes. The same way as if grandparents who once were in and out of the house, are no longer allowed. All of these things, which again, if you go back to any of the books or you go back to Amy Baker, you look at all the criteria which you use. I mean, it's no different than trying to figure out if you've got this pandemic, if you got this or that, if you got a disease, so you got to look at it. So I think that's the answer to that one. So the answer is yeah, if you can use the evidence of what's happening.
Yes. I just wanted to ask you, my question is, have you seen Erasing Family, the documentary? I'm assuming you have.
Which one?
Erasing Family, the documentary.
Erasing Families?
Yeah. Did you watch the documentary?
Yeah, there's one of my one of my cases is in there.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
Yep.
I thought the documentary is really well done, and I was hoping that we
Yep.
get,
Yep.
Kathy
That-
has
that-
arranged
was-
several screenings.
Yeah, that was a case, the case that I had there, which is in that documentary, was the mother came to me and said that the father has alienated the older boy. And we shut down the father's access to the younger child. Bang. And all hell broke loose. But the result was we successfully kept that younger child away while we dealt with the older child. And in the process, we lost the older boy through a variety of interesting little things ultimately, but the younger child never was sucked into that.
Oh, that's interesting. So if one child isn't alienated and then does that does that help a judge see parental alienation if only one child is alienated too?
Well, yeah, I mean, when we
I
showed,
guess that's how you
you
present
know,
the case.
so we were essentially in breach of a vacation order. So it was, the child is supposed to go back to dad for the balance of August. And I said, no way, Jose. And we never really did reconnect that child because the older boy went bananas, started doing all kinds of nonsensical things with the father, and the father's mother was the villain in that piece. The grandmother was the villain in that piece. But anyway, so every case has got its own little quirks.
Okay. Any other questions from the group?
Yeah, I might
Okay.
try to
go ahead.
redirect the conversation into equal parenting, if I may.
Sure.
I know that Justin Trottier, as part of CAFE, and various other people are promoting advocacy to the federal candidates for the upcoming election on September 20th. And I'd like to talk about that if we could. Now, I understand from what Carey's talking about is that British Columbia has and from what other people have told me, has almost like a presumption of equal parenting in their provincial act. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why, but it's easier to support it. I mean, when Ann Cools came out here a year or two ago, just before she retired, and she wanted me to get involved and help her in an amendment to the Divorce Act, which was supposed to help. And I looked at it and I politely said, Ann, forget that. Just copy what the BC, what we say, you know, with that one added, it's a presumption. But that it's all there. So I was quite surprised. I don't know the Ontario Act. I know that if you look at case law, if you want to go into court with a book full of cases to prove your point, you know, there's many, many more in Ontario because there's more cases. There's some good ones in BC. You know, it's fact-based, and it's a little bit of a luck of the draw and who you get. It's how well you prepare. It's also important, you know, as a lawyer, I'm talking, it's important to step up soon. Now, this may be for all of you, this all may be too late, but tell your friends, go to court quickly. I have a book out on dads representing themselves, and I make the point that we men are too patient in the beginning when we should act, and we don't have enough patience once it gets going. In other words, jump. And that was one of the things I learned from Richard Gardner, was that, you know, it astounds me how many lawyers, how many clients I get who say that their lawyer said, oh, don't rock the boat, don't go to court, she'll change her mind, these things come to an end. absolutely the worst advice you can possibly give.
Mhm.
He says you get in there right away, and I do. You're right in there, bang. Try to establish something, and no matter what it is, get an order for something, because you can't lose that. And you expand from that over time. But to sit back and sort of, it's like if the family's breaking down and the wife says, "Why don't you go and stay a couple nights with your brother?" Don't do it, because you come back and the door's locked. Now, you don't want to stay in the matrimonial home in a situation where the cops are going to get called. So, I mean, I'm not, but they're, I've told many people when they come in, well, my wife wants me to leave. I'll go home and tell her to leave. I can't do that. Why not? Tell her to leave. Don't you leave. Now, you got to be careful. You got to know the background, but there's that presumption, so get into court, try to establish what you can for parenting and expand it from there. Don't sit back and think that somehow, the reason is going to come to this woman who probably 9 times out of 10 has wounds from her childhood of abandonment or abuse. It blows me away how many women on the other side of my cases are tragic individuals who have no clue as to why they're behaving the way they are. It's like if you've ever had anybody commit suicide in your family, you suddenly realize how prevalent suicide is in society. And if you're a male and you do what I do, you suddenly realize how many women, it's astounding, are abused or abandoned or feel abandoned in their childhood and what that does to them. They're clearly 80% on the other side of my cases, clearly. A
I
guy
have
will
a
come in.
question about that's related to this. Is there a letter anywhere that's already formatted to provide federal candidates? Re-PA? I don't know if you know a letter, but if there is a letter, a pre-formatted letter that we could all send in to our candidate, federal
Yeah.
candidate.
Or go to, I didn't have in-person candidates meetings, I guess, but raise them there too.
Yeah, yeah. So if this federal election coming up, yeah, we should all be speaking to our federal candidate about this. I have another question from Hutton. What is the best way to approach contempt of court charges if the alienating parent continually breaches court orders? My daughter is 14 and counseling is in place. However, her father continues to breach the order of parenting time and then says it's because my daughter doesn't want to see me.
Well, I don't, what province is?
What province are you from? Or this is
I'm from BC. I'm in Kelowna.
Okay,
Okay,
so
Kelowna.
is the court order a provincial family court or a Supreme Court?
It's a Supreme Court order.
All right, so contempt lies. So you just bring an application for contempt. You seek, the wording is, and if you go to the courthouse, you seek a declaration that so-and-so be found to be in contempt of the order of so-and-so dated such and such by failing to do whatever it is. And number 2, and that the person be fined $2,000 and you serve. Now, you typically get in front of a judge. It's very rare that anybody, they try to dodge it. They try to get a commitment from whomever the bad person is not to do it again. If it's so clear that there's been a contempt is quasi criminal. There has to be some intent. It cannot be totally accidental or out of their control. But what typically happens is that the judge will say, well, I find you in contempt, but I'm going to suspend the sentence. And if it happens again, you can be brought back in before me on this finding and I can fine you or do something. So it takes 2 or 3 contempts before anybody is dealt with severely. But the process gives you the option to do that. And you can also, it's an option to seek a change of some time that you might not be able to get because there's not been a material change. If you want something, you can say they're in contempt and I want an extra day here or something, but that's the way you do it. And keep doing it. I mean, so many people just, well, what's the point? Well, the point is it may keep continuing. You're going to, someday you may regret you didn't do it earlier.
Yeah, I did put in an application for contempt and also looking for a change of custody. And the judge put that application, the contempt portion of that application aside. So should I keep, since there's been contempt happening since that order was made, should I keep going back in and?
Yep, I think you speak to the clerk in the court, you can requisition that contempt back. You don't have to go through and serve them all over again. They've already been served. You can requisition it back on. And if you want to add new items, then you have to start another notice of application. Yeah, stay at it. Just keep it up.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Carey, we have one question. I think I found your book. It's Dad Win Without a Lawyer. Is that, they wanted to know the book name. Is that your book name?
Yeah.
It's called, I'm sharing it in there, Dad Win Without a Lawyer. And it is written by Canadian family law pioneer. I put the Amazon link in the description.
No, it doesn't give so much legal advice as psychological advice.
And it would be good for any parent, not just the dad, you
Oh
think?
yeah, no, it's aimed at dads, but I say many times to protect myself from the feminists. Women can do that, can read this and benefit as well. It basically says that here you are as a father losing your kids. It's the worst goddamn time in your life. You're down as low as you can go in your ashes. And now is the opportunity to look and figure out what the hell went wrong in your life. Where did you, what was your hero worship that went crazy? How did you go wrong? There's so many things can happen, and now's the time to try to fix yourself. So you come back into court as a healthy human being. And so a judge looks at you and says, this is a man who will be a good father. You're not coming in, having had too much alcohol or workaholic or a womanaholic. It's to give you the strength that a judge can see who you are. And even if it's after, it's a psychological thing about how you take the worst thing that can happen in your life and turn it into something useful.
And so a woman that's dealing with a narcissist ex or a sociopath could use a lot of the same principles, I think.
Maybe it's not so much how you deal with it, it's how you take advantage of the fact that you have been completely screwed. You've never felt so low. Now is the best time to examine everything about your life that got you there. I mean, boys grow up wanting to be heroes, right? Want to be the fireman, then you're a teenager, you want to be Bill Gates, and then you want to be somebody else, and then you want to be somebody else, and you want to get the best girl, you want to have a family, blah, blah, blah. And at some point in your life, you suddenly realize those were all nonsensical ambitions. Well, where did I give up on myself? And how is it I got here? And what should I do to come back up from the ashes, a different route, so that I can get back up and be who I thought I should have been if I'd had the wherewithal to think about it? And how does that make me a better father? And if you do that, my argument is if you stand up in court and represent yourself, man, you're strong. You are strong.
And Kim's wondering, why would that advice be any different for alienated mothers?
Ah,
I think
yeah.
I think a lot of it applies to women too.
Oh yeah, no, of course. Yeah.
A lot of women we get sidetracked from who we are, looking for validation from others, or lose track of and they're also at a very low point when they're being the targeted parent. So
I mean, the main thing is, projection as an example. Projection is when you put onto somebody else what you wish they would be. And so many men and women marry because they project who they think this person is. And the marriages that work, this isn't for everybody. It's just saying, one of the things about marriages that work is when you marry somebody and you find out, you start discovering the person isn't who or what you thought or wanted, you don't make a deal of it. So, oh, this is something new. That's interesting. And you deal with that. I mean, the classic example are arranged marriages. I mean, can you imagine having an arranged marriage with somebody at the age of 18 or 20 you've never met, and the culture makes you make it work. And you're married to a person that you start to discover. And yet when in our society, we marry somebody, think we know all about them, and discover, oh my God, they fart. Their hair is messy when they get up in the morning. They can't cook after all. I'm sure I'm not saying anything new to anybody.
Yeah, I think India has arranged marriages and they have like a very low divorce rate. So they just have to put up with it. That's
Yeah.
their custom.
To make it work.
Make it work. Okay, well, I think that's it for questions. So I'm just going to say thank you, Carey. And I really appreciate your time today. And I really appreciate you sharing and donating your time to help me at our group and help the parents. You provided a lot of good information and answers today.
Well, it's good. I haven't thought these thoughts for a while. Get the cobwebs out.
Yeah, I'm just
Okay,
gonna
folks.
I'm just gonna share my screen and show that the Parental Alienation group one more time because we hosted today. So I've got this we've got this Parental Alienation Canada Facebook group that hosted the event today. And as I said before, when I started, it's based on common sense rules, and we have a vigilant admin team that actually works to delete the spam, and we tried to keep it focused on good information, getting experts and having informational events, and trying to give the parents the best information to overcome their issues and also provide support. Parents can ask for referrals and get a list of their options for support and services in their community without bombardment of ad campaigns. We're here as a nonprofit, non-predatory type of space. So, and you're all welcome to come join us here at the parentalalienation.canada.com. So thank you again, Carey. And I really appreciate your time today, as I said. So I'm just gonna, if that's it, just say thank you, Carey, and I hope you all have a good night. Thank you again. Thanks for everybody coming. I appreciate all the guests too. Thank you so much. Take care,
Thank you, Monique.
everyone. Take care.
Bye.